The lecture hall fell silent as Instructor Vexthor dragged the reinforced cage to the center of the amphitheater. Inside, 3 Crindax cubs, each the size of a small hover car, slammed against the bars with enough force to dent titanium. Their obsidian scales gleamed under the overhead lights, and their triple rows of teeth gnashed with primal hunger. Akim sat in the front row, her dark eyes tracking the instructor's movements with practiced calm. Around her, the other cadets shifted nervously. The Valorians gripped their seats with all 4 arms. The crystalline Eshtar dimmed their bioluminescence instinctively. Even Mir, seated 2 rows behind her, had gone still, his usual confident posture replaced with tension. "Today," Vexthor announced, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed amusement, "we test your survival instincts. Academic knowledge means nothing if you panic when death stares you in the face." His chitinous fingers hovered over the cage release. "These cubs haven't eaten in 3 cycles. They're hungry, aggressive, and utterly untrained." A Valorian cadet raised one of her hands. "Instructor, what are the parameters?" "Survival," Vexthor interrupted. "That is your only parameter." He slammed his palm on the release mechanism. The cage door exploded outward. The Crindax cubs erupted into the lecture hall like living missiles, their claws scarring the polished floor as they scattered in different directions. Screams erupted. Cadets scrambled over seats, some activating personal shields, others freezing in terror. The first cub lunged toward a cluster of Valorians. The second circled toward the back exits where Mir and several others had retreated. The third, the largest, fixed its predatory gaze directly on Akim. She didn't move. The creature lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as it inhaled her scent. Its growl rumbled through the floor like distant thunder. Saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling against the ground. It took 1 step forward. Then another. Akim slowly raised her right hand. Palm forward, fingers splayed. The gesture looked absurdly casual, almost lazy. The Crindax cub froze mid-snarl. Its muscular haunches, coiled to spring, locked in place. The deep growl died in its throat, replaced by a confused whimper. Its triple-lidded eyes widened, pupils contracting to pinpoints as some ancient instinct overrode its hunger. The creature backed up. 1 step, 2 steps. Then it lowered its massive head and pressed its snout to the ground in a posture of complete submission. The lecture hall went deathly quiet. "What in the void?" Vexthor's mandibles hung open. Akim turned her attention to the second cub, which had cornered Mir against the far wall. She raised her hand again. Same gesture, same calm authority. The cub's head snapped toward her. For a heartbeat, it seemed ready to ignore her, its focus locked on the terrified young man pressed against the wall. Akim didn't speak. Didn't need to. She simply held the gesture, and something in her posture, some indefinable quality, radiated dominance. The second cub whined. Its aggressive stance crumbled. Within seconds, it slunk across the hall and joined its sibling in submission at Akim's feet. The third cub, still harassing the Valorians, caught sight of its packmate's surrender. It hesitated, torn between prey and pack hierarchy. Akim lowered her hand, then raised it again with deliberate slowness. The cub abandoned the Valorians instantly. It practically scrambled to reach her, nearly tripping over its own massive paws in its haste to prostrate itself before the human. All 3 Crindax cubs, apex predators bred for war, each capable of tearing through armored vehicles, lay flat on the ground before a single human woman who hadn't moved from her seat. Instructor Vexthor approached cautiously, his scanning device already active. "This is impossible. Crindax cubs don't submit. They're not domesticable. We specifically chose them because nothing short of lethal force can stop them once they're hunting." He studied Akim with his compound eyes. "What did you do, cadet?" Akim finally stood, her hand still raised. The cubs didn't move except to track her with their eyes. "Nothing special, Instructor. Just showed dominance." "Dominance?" Vexthor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. These creatures don't recognize dominance displays from species outside their evolutionary tree. That's why they're used in combat scenarios. "They recognize it from humans," Akim said simply. Mir had finally caught his breath and made his way down from the upper rows. "Akim, how did you know that would work?" She glanced at him, a slight smile touching her lips. "My grandmother used to raise dogs back on Earth, aggressive breeds. She taught me that predators understand 2 things universally, strength and confidence. Show neither fear nor aggression, just certainty." She lowered her hand slowly. The cubs remained motionless. These cubs are just oversized puppies with better teeth. Puppies, Vexthor repeated flatly. You're comparing Krindak's war beasts to Earth canines. Social pack hunters with hierarchical instincts? Yes. Akeem reached down and, before anyone could stop her, placed her hand on the largest cub's head. It leaned into her touch, producing a sound somewhere between a purr and a rumble. The principle is the same. They're looking for a leader. I just showed them I was it. The other cadets began to emerge from their hiding places, staring in disbelief. The Valorian who'd asked about parameters approached cautiously. Cadet Akeem, would this work for any human? Any human willing to commit to it completely, Akeem replied. Hesitation is failure. Fear is failure. You have to believe you're the apex even when you're not. She scratched behind the cub's auditory ridge and it practically melted under her touch. Humans got good at that, had to. We weren't the strongest on our world, or the fastest or the most dangerous. But we learned to fake it until we made it. Vexthor deactivated his scanner. I'm amending my report on humanity's military potential. Again. He gestured to his assistants. Get those cubs back in the cage, carefully. And someone contact the xenopsychology department. They're going to want to study this. As the assistants nervously approached with containment fields, Akeem gave the cubs a final pat. They followed her hand with their eyes, whining softly as she withdrew. Mir shook his head in amazement. You just dominated 3 war beasts with your bare hand. Just showed them who's boss, Akeem said, returning to her seat as if nothing unusual had happened. Pretty standard human trick, really. And in that moment, watching the other species look at Akeem with newfound wariness and respect, Mir understood something fundamental. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute, unshakable audacity to be apex predators wherever they went, even when they had no right to be. Indy,